a little princess. Lottie was more puzzled than anyone with the changes in her beloved Sarah. She could not understand why Sarah always wore the same black dress or why someone else lived in Sarah's old room. She asked, but Sarah didn't answer. Sarah was afraid Miss Minchin might hear and be angry with Lottie for talking to Sarah. But Lottie was determined to find the answers to her questions. Late one afternoon, Lottie had seen Sarah go up the attic stairs. Lottie followed her. She found Sarah standing on the table and looking out the window. Lottie looked around at the ugly, bare room. It made her sad to think her beautiful Sarah lived there. "Sarah!" she said, her voice tearful. Sarah turned at the sound of her voice. She knew that if Lottie cried, she would too. "Don't cry," she said quickly. "It's not such a bad room, Lottie. You can see all sorts of things from here you can't see downstairs." Lottie climbed up on the table beside Sarah. "See all the chimneys?" Sarah said. Look at the smoke curling up in wreaths." "And clouds," Lottie said. "And all those birds." Lottie took a bun from her pocket. They crumbled it and fed it to the sparrows. "It's a really lovely room," Sarah said. "In the morning, I can watch the sunrise, and at night, the sunset." "Oh, Sarah," Lottie said, "I want to live here too." When Lottie went downstairs again, the happiness of the moment went with her. Sarah stayed at the window looking out. The window across the way stared blankly at her. "If only someone lived there," she said softly to herself. "Sometimes this is the loneliest place in the world." But in the attic, at least she could talk to Ermengarde and Lottie when they sneaked up to see her. They couldn't do that often for fear of being caught. But it was better than nothing, and she had Becky. Usually both of them were too tired at the end of the day to talk much, but it was good to know there was a friend on the other side of the wall. Even if she had lost most of her friends in school, once outside, Sarah still had the Large family. She looked for them eagerly when she ran errands. There were 8 children, she learned, and their real name was Carmichael. One evening at Christmas time, when Sarah was returning to Miss Minchin's, the Carmichael children were climbing up into their carriage. They were dressed in party clothes. Sarah forgot her basket and the shabby cape and stopped to watch. The smallest boy saw Sarah standing in the shadows, cold and hungry. He had heard Christmas stories about kind people giving poor children money. He had a coin in his pocket, so he took it out and offered it to her. "Here, poor little girl." Sarah's face went red. "Oh, no," she said. "I couldn't take your money." She didn't sound like a street child. The boy's older sisters, Janet and Nora, leaned forward to listen. The little boy said, "I want you to have it." His face was so honest and kind, Sarah knew she'd hurt his feelings if she refused. She took the coin. "Thank you," she said. "You are a kind little darling." A beggar would never say a thing like that, thought Janet and Nora. From that time on, the Large family was as interested in Sarah as she was in it. Faces appeared at bedroom windows when Sarah passed. They talked about her often, calling her the little girl who was not a beggar. No matter how hungry she got, Sarah never spent the coin. She wore it on a faded ribbon around her neck. One day, she saw a large wagon full of furniture next door. The house would no longer be empty. She was excited and curious. Who would live in the empty house? Would someone take the attic room? That night, Becky brought her news. "It's an Indian gentleman who's coming to live next door," she said. "He's very rich, but he's had lots of trouble and he's sick." The father of the large family is his lawyer. An Indian gentleman, Sarah thought. Someone from home. Several days later, Sarah was returning from an errand when a carriage pulled up to the house. Mr. Carmichael got out first. A nurse and a servant stepped forward. They helped their employer, a thin, sick man wrapped in furs. Sarah's heart went out to him because he looked so unhappy. She raced up to her room and scrambled up on the table. The sun was setting. The sky was brilliant with streamers of red and gold. She had the feeling that she was thousands of miles away from her small, ugly room, the kitchen, the schoolroom, and Miss Minchin's scolding. Suddenly, a head emerged from the attic window next door. It was an Indian man, a servant. He held a monkey in his arms. He had a faraway look in his eye. He's homesick, Sarah thought. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Just then, the monkey broke loose and, chattering, ran across the roof straight into Sarah's room. "Will he let me catch him?" Sarah called out to the Hindustani. He called out in Hindustani, the man's native language. The Indian man was surprised and delighted to hear words of his own language coming from this lovely little girl. "He's fast," he answered her, "and hard to catch. If you will permit me, I will catch him." Sarah agreed. The man steadily and lightly crossed over the roof to her room. He quickly captured the monkey. He looked around her room and then back at Sarah. He was confused. Room and girl did not match. Finally, he bowed. "Ram Das, at your service," he said. "How do you do?" Sarah said politely. Ram Das then crossed the roof again, as agile as the monkey, and disappeared through his window. Sarah stood in the middle of the room and thought of the many things his face and manner had brought back to her. Her life in India with servants all around seemed like a far-off dream. It was over. Her life had changed. This room and her work downstairs, these were her life now. But one thing hadn't changed. She was still Sarah Crewe. "Whatever happens," she said aloud, "inside, I am still Papa's little princess. So what if I wear rags? It's easy to be a princess in silks and gold. It's a challenge to be one when no one knows." Sarah held her head higher as she worked, and she was always kind, no matter what the others said or did. She looked forward to errands regardless of the weather because they gave her the chance to learn more about the old gentleman next door. Though Ram Das and the other servants were Indian, the owner of the house was not. He was an Englishman, like her father. His name was Mr. Carrisford. He had made a great deal of money and thought it lost. Though he had regained his fortune, he had almost died of brain fever and was still ill. His troubles, like those of Sarah's father, had been connected with diamond mines. Sarah wished she could make Mr. Carrisford well again and bring a smile to his sad face. When she looked out her attic window, she would wish him good night. Perhaps kind thoughts reached people, and even through walls and doors. Just as she was learning about Mr. Carrisford, he was learning about her. Janet and Nora of the large family told him about the little girl who was not a beggar, and Ram Das told him about the adventure with the wandering monkey. "She lives in such a poor room," he said, and still she smiles. "Do you suppose," Mr. Carrisford said to Mr. Carmichael, "that Ralph Crewe's child is living in such a miserable conditions?" He put his head in his hands. After a long silence, he said, "I must find her. If she is penniless, it is my fault. Poor Crew put every penny he had into my plan. He trusted me, and he died thinking I had ruined him." "We'll find her," Mr. Carmichael said. It's just a matter of time." "In the meantime," Mr. Carrisford said, "I would like to do something for the little girl who is not a beggar." Stay tuned for part 7. See you later. Bye.